If you are watching this recording, it means the galaxy has already decided I was supposed to disappear. Jack Callahan looked directly into the small camera lens, sitting alone inside a transport capsule that was about to leave him on the most feared planet in known space. The funny thing is, nobody ever asked the planet what it wanted. The words were calm, almost too calm. Outside the reinforced window, Vesper 9 filled the darkness like a warning nobody wanted to read. Endless gray oceans covered the surface. Storm systems stretched for hundreds of miles. The atmosphere shifted every few hours, turning a beautiful horizon into something unpredictable. For generations, every species that attempted to establish a permanent station there had eventually abandoned the effort. The Galactic Research Authority had given it a simple name: the Planet of No Return. Jack Callahan had spent most of his life around places people ignored. He was 38 years old, a former environmental systems technician from Oregon who had worked on ocean recovery projects back on Earth before joining deep space exploration programs. He was not a soldier. He was not a celebrity. He was not the kind of person anyone expected to become a symbol. He was just a man who knew how to fix broken equipment and spend a quiet afternoon with a fishing rod. Behind the glass, Director Cale Thorne watched the final preparations from the observation deck. The tall alien administrator stood with his hands folded behind his back, his silver-gray skin reflecting the cold lights of the facility. "The human understands the conditions," Cale said. Dr. Lyra Voss stood beside him, studying Jack's file on her display. "He understands he is being sent alone." Cale glanced at her. "There is a difference?" Lyra did not answer immediately. She looked again at the image of Jack sitting inside the capsule. He was not begging. He was not demanding rescue. He was writing something in a small notebook. "Most species would spend their final minutes asking why," she said quietly. "Humans are unusual." Cale gave a dismissive expression. "Humans are emotional creatures. Their reputation is built on surviving situations that should have ended them. This experiment will finally show the truth." The capsule shook as the launch sequence began. Jack placed the notebook into his survival pack and looked around the small cabin. There was no luxury, no advanced technology beyond what was necessary, no promise of rescue, just enough supplies to last a short time, enough for observation, enough for data, enough for the galaxy to watch. A message appeared on his screen from Galactic Research Authority headquarters. Subject: Human Adaptation Trial. Mission Objective: Record Survival Capability on Vesper 9. Expected outcome: failure. Jack stared at the final word for a moment. Failure. He smiled slightly. Not because he was angry. Not because he wanted revenge. It was simply the kind of mistake he had seen many times before. People looked at something unfamiliar and assumed they already understood it. He picked up the camera and turned it on again. "Day 1, he said. "They dropped me on a planet where nobody lasts more than a few months." He looked through the window at the endless ocean below. "So I guess the first thing I need to figure out is whether this place is actually impossible." He paused, watching the clouds move across the alien sky. Or if everyone just stopped trying too soon. The capsule entered the atmosphere. Across the galaxy, thousands of scientists prepared to watch a human disappear. But none of them knew the first thing Jack Callahan planned to do after landing. He was not going to fight the planet. He was not going to conquer it. He was going to learn from it. And that was the first thing they misunderstood about humanity. The first thing Jack Callahan noticed about Vesper 9 was that it was quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. There was a difference. The kind of silence that made a person feel small, like the entire world was waiting to see what they would do next. The capsule touched down on a flat stretch of black sand near the edge of an endless ocean. The landing system released the locks, and the door slowly opened. Jack stood there for a moment, holding his survival pack over one shoulder, listening to the unfamiliar wind outside. The air filter on his helmet adjusted automatically, removing traces of chemicals that could harm a human. The warning display flashed again. Atmospheric instability. Severe weather probability. Limited communication range. Jack looked at the information, then looked at the ocean. "Well," he said quietly, "that is not exactly a warm welcome." Back in orbit, hundreds of scientists watched the live feed. They expected fear. They expected confusion. They expected a human being overwhelmed by a planet that had defeated every previous expedition. Instead, Jack walked forward and started taking notes. Director Cale Thorne watched from the observation room, with growing frustration. Why is he documenting the environment, he asked. Dr. Lyra Voss looked at the screen. Because he is trying to understand it. Kale gave a cold smile. He has 20 hours of emergency supplies. Understanding will not change that. Lyra said nothing. She continued watching. On the surface, Jack moved carefully along the coastline. He checked the ground, studied the water patterns, and collected small samples using basic equipment. He was not looking for a way to escape. He was looking for a way to stay. That was something the observers did not understand. Most species saw survival as a battle against nature. Humans often saw it as a conversation. The planet was not attacking him. It was giving him information. By sunset, Jack had built a small temporary shelter using materials from the surrounding area. It was not impressive. It was not advanced. But it was practical. He placed his camera outside and recorded his first entry. Day 1 update. The planet is definitely trying to make things difficult. The weather changes fast, the ground shifts near the water, and I have not found a reliable food source yet. He looked toward the ocean. But difficult does not mean impossible. Millions of viewers across the galaxy started watching the broadcast. At first, they watched because they expected failure. Then they kept watching because they were confused. Why was this human smiling? Why was he acting like he was camping instead of being stranded? Hours later, Jack made his first mistake. While testing the coastline, the ground beneath him became unstable after a sudden weather change. He dropped his equipment and barely managed to pull himself back to stable ground. The camera captured the moment. For the first time, the galaxy saw him struggle. But they also saw what happened next. Jack did not panic. He sat down, caught his breath, looked at the damaged equipment, and laughed softly. Okay, he said. Lesson learned. The planet has rules. I should probably start paying attention. The recording spread faster than anyone expected. Lyra watched the clip again and again. The other researchers saw a man who had almost failed. She saw something else. She saw someone who had just learned from failure instead of surrendering to it. Then a new alert appeared across every monitoring station. A storm system larger than any recorded on Vesper 9 was moving directly toward Jack's location. Kale looked at the approaching storm and finally smiled. Now we will see what humans are really made of. But Lyra kept watching Jack. Because she noticed something nobody else did. While everyone else was looking at the storm, Jack was looking at the ocean. And somehow, he looked curious. The storm arrived before sunrise. Jack Callahan knew that because the ocean changed first, the waves became quieter, not louder. The birds that had been circling the shoreline disappeared. Even the strange creatures moving beneath the surface vanished into deeper water. Jack stood outside his shelter, watching the horizon while his weather monitor continued flashing warnings. Severe atmospheric disturbance approaching. Estimated arrival, 40 minutes. Back in orbit, the scientists watched with confidence. To them, this was the moment the experiment had been designed for. Previous teams had failed because they tried to survive Vesper 9 using technology alone. They built machines. They built barriers. They built systems that assumed the planet would behave like a controlled environment. Jack did something different. He watched. He is wasting time, Director Cale Thorne said from the observation room. The storm will destroy his temporary shelter. Dr. Lyra Voss looked at the screen. You keep saying destroy. Cale turned toward her. Because that is what happens. Lyra pointed at the monitor. Then why did he move the shelter 20 yards away from the original location? Cale paused. The room became quiet. Nobody had noticed. Jack had spent the previous hours studying the coastline. He had noticed small changes in the water movement, the way the sand shifted, and how the wind patterns changed before the storm arrived. He was not guessing. He was learning. On the surface, Jack finished securing the last piece of equipment. He looked at the camera. A lot of people think survival is about fighting the environment, he said. I have found that usually makes things worse. The environment is not angry at you. It is just doing what it does. He picked up his fishing gear from the storage case. The trick is figuring out what it is telling you. The galaxy did not understand why he carried a fishing rod onto a dangerous planet. Some viewers laughed. Others called it a joke. A human had been sent to one of the harshest places ever discovered, and he was preparing to fish. But Jack was not looking for entertainment. He had noticed movement in the shallow waters near the new shelter location. Something lived there. Something that had adapted to the changing conditions of Vesper 9. The storm arrived. The sky turned dark as powerful winds moved across the coastline. Jack stayed inside his reinforced shelter, monitoring the conditions and making small adjustments whenever something changed. Hours passed. The storm did not break him. It taught him. When the weather finally calmed, Jack stepped outside. The entire landscape looked different. The old shoreline was covered with new channels of water. Strange plants had opened along the wet ground. And near the edge of the ocean, he saw what he had been looking for. A creature moving through the shallow water. Jack slowly lowered himself near the shore, careful not to disturb it. He watched its movements for several minutes. Then he smiled. "You are not hiding," he said quietly. "You are waiting." He adjusted his equipment and made the first careful attempt. The recording showed nothing dramatic. No great victory. No impossible achievement. Just a human sitting by an alien ocean, learning how another world worked. But that simple moment changed everything. Lyra watched the footage in silence. "He is not trying to survive the planet," she whispered. "He is becoming part of it." Cale looked annoyed. "Do not romanticize a data sample." Lyra turned toward him. "That is exactly the mistake your entire program keeps making. You see a subject. He sees a home. Then the monitoring system suddenly alerted the room. Jack's signal had changed. A new biological pattern had appeared in the ocean near his location. Something nobody had recorded before. Something that could only mean one thing. Jack Callahan was not alone on Vesper 9 anymore. The first sign that something was wrong was not a warning alarm. It was the silence. Jack Callahan stood at the edge of the alien shoreline, holding his fishing rod in one hand while watching the strange creature move beneath the dark water. For the first time since arriving on Vesper 9, he felt like the planet was watching him back. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen. It moved slowly through the shallow waves, covered in natural patterns that shifted with the light. It was not aggressive. It was curious. Jack lowered his equipment and whispered, "Well, you are definitely not something they mentioned in the survival guide." Millions of viewers across the Galactic network watched the moment unfold. The same scientists who expected a failed experiment were now watching a human calmly studying an unknown life form. Dr. Lyra Voss leaned closer to the screen. That species was never detected by previous missions. Director Cale Thorne looked annoyed. Then previous missions were not thorough. Lyra shook her head. No, previous missions were not patient. On the surface, Jack carefully adjusted his camera. He recorded the creature from a safe distance, taking notes about its behavior, movement, and reaction to the environment. He did not try to capture it. He did not try to control it. He simply observed. That was what confused the alien researchers the most. Their civilizations had spent thousands of years studying life through containment and measurement. Humans often started with something simpler. They watched. They listened. They waited. Then the ocean changed. A sudden shift in the planet's magnetic field caused the water levels near Jack's camp to rise faster than expected. His temporary shelter began shaking as the ground beneath it became unstable. The emergency monitor flashed warnings across his screen. Jack grabbed his equipment and moved quickly. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood something important. Vesper 9 was always changing. Standing still meant losing. He secured the most important supplies and moved toward higher ground while the storm system returned from the horizon. Back in orbit, the observation room became tense. "He will lose everything," Cale said. Lyra kept watching. "No, he is choosing what matters." On the planet, Jack reached the top of a rocky ridge just as the coastal area below transformed. The shelter was damaged, some equipment was lost, but Jack was still standing. He looked down at the ocean and noticed something unexpected. The strange aquatic creature had followed the movement of the water and was now near the new shoreline. It had adapted too. Jack laughed quietly. "So that is your trick." He looked at the creature. "You do not fight the storm. You move with it." The recording spread even faster. Viewers who came expecting to see a human fail began seeing something they had never witnessed before. A person surviving without trying to dominate the world around him. But then another signal appeared on the monitoring system. It was not from Jack. It was from a research drone that had been sent to observe him. The drone had entered the atmosphere without permission from the surface team. Cale had ordered it launched. "We need complete data," Cale said. Lyra turned toward him. "You are interfering with the experiment." Cale replied coldly. "I am protecting the truth." On the screen, Jack noticed the approaching drone. He recognized the design immediately. It was not a rescue unit. It was observation equipment. He stared at it for a moment, then looked back at the camera. Interesting, he said. They still think I am the thing being tested. The drone descended toward the coastline, scanning everything around him. But what nobody expected was that Jack did not hide from it. He walked toward it. Because after days on Vesper 9, he had learned something the entire galaxy had missed. The planet was not the challenge. The real challenge was convincing everyone else to stop assuming they already knew the answer. Jack Callahan stood beneath the hovering research drone and did something nobody in the observation room expected. He waved at it. Not a desperate signal, not a request for help, just a simple wave, like he was greeting a neighbor who had shown up late for a conversation. You know, Jack said to the camera attached to his survival pack, I have been on this planet for almost 2 weeks, and somehow the most confusing thing here is still the people watching me. The drone lowered slowly, scanning the area around him. Its sensors collected atmospheric readings, biological samples, and environmental data. Jack watched the machine move above him and noticed something unusual. It was not built for exploration. It was built for evaluation. Someone was not trying to understand Vesper 9. They were trying to judge him. Back aboard the orbital station, Director Cale Thorne watched the live feed with a satisfied expression. Now we will have accurate results, he said. Dr. Lyra Voss looked at the data streaming across her screen. You already had results. Cale looked at her. From a man walking around with a camera and fishing equipment? Lyra stayed quiet for a moment. From a human who survived conditions that eliminated every previous expedition. Cale dismissed the statement with a small gesture. Survival is not the same as advancement. On the surface, Jack continued exploring while the drone followed him. He noticed the machine copied his movements, recording every decision he made. So he decided to test something. Instead of walking toward the safest path, he walked toward the shoreline where the strange aquatic creatures gathered. The drone immediately marked the area as dangerous. Jack looked at the warning display. That is interesting, he said. The computer thinks this is a bad idea. The computer also thought this planet was impossible. He smiled slightly. The computer has a pattern. For the next several hours, Jack recorded everything. He showed how the creatures moved with the changing tides. He showed how certain plants absorbed minerals from the water. He showed how the entire ecosystem worked together instead of fighting against itself. The viewers who once laughed at him started asking questions. Why did a human understand this environment better than the scientists who studied it for years? Then something unexpected happened. The drone malfunctioned. Its systems began failing after exposure to the planet's unstable energy fields. The machine dropped lower and landed near Jack's camp. The research team expected Jack to ignore it. After all, the drone belonged to the people who sent him there. Instead, Jack walked over and inspected the damaged equipment. You know, he said, looking at the drone, I am starting to think this place is not the hardest thing to survive. He opened his toolkit and began repairing the machine. Millions watched as the human they considered a test subject fixed the technology of the civilization observing him. Lyra stood silently in the control room. She understood what she was seeing before anyone else did. Jack was not proving humans could survive harsh environments. He was proving something much bigger. Humans did not need perfect conditions to create a future. They created a future wherever they arrived. Then a new message appeared on every screen in the station. Emergency notice from Galactic Research Authority. Human subject classification updated. Status changed from observation target to unknown variable. Cale stared at the message. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Lyra looked back at the planet below. You wanted to know what humans were capable of, she said quietly. I think we are finally starting to find out. The message arrived at exactly the wrong time for Director Cale Thorne. The repaired research drone was still transmitting data from Vesper 9, and millions of viewers across the galactic network were watching a human repair alien technology with simple tools and patience. Then Cale saw the updated classification. Unknown variable. Not subject. Not failure. Not experiment. Unknown variable. He stared at the screen for several seconds. Remove that designation, he ordered. The technicians looked at each other. Director, the classification was generated by the system. Cale stepped closer, then changed the system. Dr. Lyra Voss watched him carefully. You cannot rewrite the data because you dislike the result. Cale turned toward her. You are forgetting your position, Doctor. This project exists because the galaxy needs answers. Lyra looked back at the image of Jack standing beside the repaired drone. No. This project exists because you wanted confirmation of something you already believed. Kale did not respond. Because she was right. For years, he had believed advanced civilizations were created by control. Perfect environments. Perfect systems. Perfect technology. Species that struggled were simply not prepared for the future. But Jack Callahan was showing the galaxy something different. On Vesper 9, there was no perfect environment. There was no safety net. There was only adaptation. And that made Kale uncomfortable. On the planet below, Jack noticed something strange. The repaired drone was not leaving. It remained near his camp, continuing to observe. Jack looked at it while preparing his equipment. You know, you could just ask questions, he said. The drone obviously did not answer. Jack smiled. Still working on communication, huh? Then his monitor received a new transmission. Not from the drone. From the orbital station. Kale's voice came through the speaker. Jack Callahan, you are instructed to stop interfering with the research process. Jack looked at the camera. Interfering, he repeated. I thought I was the research process. There was a pause. Even through the communication delay, Jack could feel the frustration on the other side. You are collecting unauthorized data, Kale said. You are changing the conditions of the experiment. Jack looked around at the ocean, the shelter, and the life he had discovered. I am living here. His voice remained calm. That is what living things do. They change things around them. Kale ended the communication. But Lyra noticed something before the connection closed. Jack was no longer asking for permission. He was not waiting for approval from the people who sent him there. He had started building a life. That was the moment Kale decided the experiment had gone too far. He activated a new protocol, a containment order. The official explanation was simple. The human had contaminated the environment. The human had affected the results. The human had become unpredictable. Lyra immediately objected. You cannot call natural adaptation contamination. Kale looked at her. You can when the adaptation proves the original theory wrong. On Vesper 9, Jack received another alert. The repaired drone had detected incoming systems from orbit. Not rescue equipment. Not scientific instruments. New observation units. More controlled. More restrictive. Jack watched them approach through the clouds. For the first time since landing, he stopped smiling. Not because he was afraid. Because he finally understood. The planet was never the thing trying to stop him. The real challenge was the people who could not accept what he had discovered. Jack picked up his camera and started recording. Day 16, he said. I think I finally understand why nobody ever returned from this place. He looked toward the sky. It was not because they could not survive here. The new drones moved closer. Jack tightened the strap on his equipment and looked back at the ocean. It was because they never gave this place a chance to show them what it really was. Far above, Kale watched the same recording. And for the first time, he was not watching a failed experiment. He was watching a problem he could no longer control. Jack Callahan watched the sky above Vesper 9 change from blue-gray to something darker. Not because of the weather. Not because of another storm. This time, he knew exactly what was coming. The new drones moved through the clouds with perfect formation, scanning the surface below. They were not exploring. They were measuring. They were not trying to understand the planet. They were trying to restore control. Jack stood beside his small shelter and looked at the camera. You know, he said quietly, there is something funny about people who send you somewhere impossible. He watched the drones descend. They always expect you to become the problem. The live feed reached billions of viewers across the Galactic network. Everyone saw the same thing. A human standing alone on a forgotten planet, facing the people who had sent him there. In the orbital station, Director Kale Thorne watched the broadcast with a serious expression. Begin environmental reset procedures, he ordered. The technician beside him hesitated. Director, the area has developed a stable ecosystem. Kale looked at the screen. Temporary changes caused by an outside influence. Dr. Lyra Voss stepped forward. You mean Jack? Kale turned toward her. I mean contamination. Lyra studied his face. You are afraid. The room became silent. Kale slowly looked at her. Be careful with your words. No, Lyra replied. I am being careful with the truth. She pointed toward the screen. For years, you believed survival was proof of superiority. You believed anything that could not survive alone was weak. She paused. But Jack did not just survive. He created something. Kale looked away. He did not want to hear it because deep down, he knew she was right. On Vesper 9, The first drone landed near Jack's camp. It scanned his shelter, his equipment, and the surrounding environment. A mechanical voice spoke through the speaker. Human subject. Cease unauthorized environmental modification. Jack raised an eyebrow. Environmental modification? He looked around at the small garden area he had created using native plants and recycled materials. You mean planting food and cleaning water? The drone remained silent. Jack nodded slowly. Right. Very dangerous behavior. The second drone arrived. Then the third. They began collecting his equipment and preparing to remove his research data. Jack watched carefully. He did not fight them. He did not panic. Instead, he walked to his camera and started recording. Day 18. The people watching me have decided the biggest threat on this planet is not the storms, not the unknown wildlife, and not the environment. He looked directly into the lens. Apparently, the biggest threat is a person learning how to live. The recording immediately spread across the Galactic network. Viewers who had followed Jack from the beginning noticed something important. He was not angry. He was disappointed, and that made the message stronger. Then something unexpected happened. One of the drones stopped. Its systems began displaying conflicting information. The machine compared its original database with the new data from Vesper 9. The results did not match. The planet was not becoming more dangerous. It was becoming more stable. The drone transmitted a report back to the station. Unknown factor detected. Human presence increasing planetary survival probability. The entire observation room froze. Lyra slowly looked at Kale. The planet is improving because of him. Kale stared at the message. For the first time, there was no simple explanation. No category. No label. No place to put Jack Callahan. Then another message appeared. It was not from the research system. It was from thousands of scientists across the galaxy requesting access to Jack's recordings. The human they sent away was no longer a failed experiment. He was the only person who had ever succeeded. Kale closed his hand around the control panel. He realized the biggest mistake was not sending Jack to Vesper 9. The mistake was believing they were the ones studying him. The galaxy had spent years asking one question. Could humans survive where others could not? But after 18 days on Vesper 9, everyone watching the live feed realized they had been asking the wrong question. The real question was much harder. What happens when a human finds a place nobody else understood? Jack Callahan sat beside the ocean, repairing a small piece of equipment while the entire galactic network watched. The same man who was supposed to become a failed experiment had become the most studied person in the galaxy. But Jack did not seem to notice. He was focused on something much simpler. You know, he said to the camera, I still have not figured out why everyone thinks surviving has to look dramatic. He looked toward the water. Most of the time, it is just paying attention. On the orbital station, scientists from hundreds of worlds analyzed his recordings. The results were impossible to ignore. Vesper 9 was changing. The air quality near Jack's settlement had improved. Native life patterns had become more stable. The environment that once rejected every visitor was now supporting one. Dr. Lyra Voss studied the data late into the artificial night cycle. She noticed something hidden inside the reports. Wait, she whispered. She pulled up the original expedition records from decades earlier. The previous teams had not failed because the planet was impossible. They had failed because they arrived with one assumption. They believed the planet needed to change for them. They never considered changing themselves. Lyra immediately contacted Jack. The connection took several seconds to establish. When his face appeared on the screen, he looked exactly the same as always. Calm, tired, curious. Dr. Voss, Jack said. I was wondering when someone would finally call to ask questions instead of sending another drone. Lyra smiled slightly. I owe you an apology. Jack looked surprised. For what? For assuming you were here to prove something. She paused. You were never trying to prove anything. You were just trying to live. Jack looked down for a moment. That is usually how life works. The conversation was interrupted by a new alert from the station. A massive data request had appeared. Not from researchers. From the Galactic Council. They wanted full access to Jack's recordings. They wanted the environmental data. They wanted everything connected to Vesper 9. Cale Thorne stood before the council representatives, presenting a carefully prepared report. He did not mention that Jack had succeeded. He did not mention that the experiment had changed. Instead, he focused on one argument. The human's presence has created unpredictable variables. We cannot allow one individual's actions to influence scientific standards across the galaxy. A council member looked at him. Director Thorne, are you saying the data is incorrect? Kale hesitated. I am saying the interpretation is premature. Then another voice appeared through the communication system. It was Lyra. No, the interpretation is clear. Everyone turned toward her. She displayed the complete environmental analysis. Vesper, 9 was classified as a dead world because we measured what it lacked. Human research measured what it could become. Silence filled the chamber. Kale looked at her with disbelief. You are choosing one human's observations over centuries of scientific knowledge. Lyra answered calmly. I am choosing evidence over pride. Across the galaxy, millions watched the exchange. For the first time, the story was no longer about a human abandoned on a dangerous planet. It was about an entire civilization realizing they had misunderstood humanity. Then Jack's camera suddenly sent a new transmission. His expression had changed. He was standing near the ocean, looking at something beyond the shoreline. Doctor, he said quietly, I think you should see this. Lyra opened the feed. The entire room went silent. Behind Jack was something nobody expected to find on Vesper 9. Not a creature, not a resource, something far older. Something that suggested the planet had never been empty at all. It had been waiting. Jack Callahan stood at the edge of the ocean, staring at the impossible discovery in front of him. For 18 days, he had believed Vesper 9 was simply a world that nobody understood. Now he realized something much bigger. The planet was not empty. It had been quiet. The strange patterns beneath the water, the unusual energy signals, and the changes in the environment were not random. They were signs of an ancient system that had been waiting for someone to notice. Dr. Voss, Jack said through the transmission, keeping his voice calm even as the entire galaxy watched. I think this planet has been trying to communicate. In the research station, nobody spoke. Scientists from hundreds of species looked at the data appearing on their screens. The information was unlike anything they had studied before. Vesper 9 was not a dead world. It was a living environment that adapted, responded, and changed alongside the creatures that respected it. Lyra watched Jack carefully. How did you find this? She asked. Jack looked toward the ocean. I stopped trying to force it to give me answers. He smiled slightly. I just paid attention. Those words spread across the galactic network within minutes. Not because they sounded powerful. Not because they sounded like a victory speech. They spread because every species understood the meaning behind them. The galaxy had spent thousands of years searching for ways to control new worlds. One human had discovered that understanding came first. Director Cale Thorne watched the broadcast from the council chamber. For the first time since the experiment began, he had no argument. Every report confirmed the same thing. Jack Callahan had achieved what every previous mission failed to do. He had not conquered Vesper 9. He had connected with it. A council representative turned toward Cale. Director Thorne, your original report classified this human as a failure risk. Cale remained silent. The representative continued. Do you still believe that assessment was accurate? Cale looked at the image of Jack standing beside the alien ocean. After a long pause, he answered quietly. No. It was the first time he had admitted it. The galaxy heard it. The man who believed weakness came from adaptation finally understood that adaptation was the greatest strength of all. Months later, Vesper 9 became the most visited research location in the galaxy. But Jack refused every offer to become a celebrity. He still lived near the ocean. He still recorded his daily discoveries. He still spent quiet mornings with his fishing rod, watching the strange creatures move through the water. His channel grew into something nobody expected. It was not a record of survival. It became a reminder that curiosity could change everything. One evening, Lyra visited him on the planet. She stood beside the shore, looking at the endless horizon. You know, she said, the entire galaxy thought you were sent here because you were expendable. Jack looked at the water. A lot of people confuse being underestimated with being powerless. Lyra smiled. And what do you think humanity is? Jack thought for a moment. Then he answered. A species that keeps learning. The son of Vesper 9 slowly disappeared beyond the ocean. A human who was supposed to vanish had become the reason an entire galaxy changed how it viewed life. They sent him somewhere nobody returned from because they believed there was nothing worth finding. They were wrong. The greatest discovery on Vesper 9 was not hidden beneath the waves or inside ancient systems. It was the simple truth Jack carried with him from Earth. Life does not survive because the universe makes room for it. Life survives because it learns how to grow wherever it stands.